Meetings are underway in Manila to discuss a set of rules aimed at preventing clashes and managing tensions in the disputed South China Sea. Officials from China, which claims most of the South China Sea, are meeting diplomats from the Philippines, Malaysia and Vietnam. These are among nations that challenge Chinese claims in the region. And in the past, those competing claims have led to confrontations between Chinese ships and ships of other countries. A legally binding code of conduct in the South China Sea between China and the 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, has been seen as a way of preventing these clashes. But 21 years of discussions have yielded very little. And here's why.
The battle for control in the South China Sea. This footage capturing more tense confrontations between the Philippines and China just a few weeks ago. These incidents leading to another diplomatic dispute.
Speed, sir, 0.7 knots, sir, 0.8 knots, sir.
Just one of many taking place with Beijing over these hotly disputed waters. The South China Sea is a resource-rich, globally significant shipping area, most of which Beijing considers a part of China, as indicated by what it calls the nine-dashed line. But several neighbouring countries have competing claims over different parts of the sea and the various islands in between, and are willing to fight for them. It's Beijing's actions, though, that have raised tensions in the region to boiling point in recent years, accused of building illegal structures, these ones documented by the Philippine military. There have also been many incidents of intimidation at sea, involving various nations. And in the air. There's even been an attempt to plant a Chinese flag deep beneath the waves. The closest any country has got to denting China's sovereignty claims is the Philippines, celebrating victory in a territorial dispute case at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2016. ASEAN member states are still hoping to tie down China to a binding code of conduct to help settle maritime disputes. But despite decades of trying, one is still yet to materialise. There's also a bigger geopolitical game at play here, with the United States at the forefront. It's made moves to bolster ties with key regional allies, while also increasing its maritime and military presence in and around the South China Sea.
Let's get more context on this now. Joining me for more is Nguyen Khac Tsiang. He's a visiting fellow at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. Mr. Nguyen, ASEAN and China have been discussing a code of conduct in the South China Sea for at least 21 years. Why don't we have a legally binding code as yet?
Well, I think it's very important to know the motivation and interest of different parties in this effort for, a code of conduct. For ASEAN countries, they really want to have a binding code of conduct in the South China Sea to prevent countries, to escalate or to use their military power to threaten other countries. But for countries like China, as the single most powerful state in the region, there is no point for them to, agree to this binding code of conduct. So the code of conduct actually follow the effort to build a Declaration on Conduct, or DOC, which was signed in 2002. But this one was, non-binding. So other countries in Southeast Asia really wanted to build a legally binding document, which is a code of conduct. And they have been trying to discuss within themselves and with China to build this code of conduct for a very long time, but to no avail. Because obviously, when you have a very powerful country which doesn't really want to follow the rules and doesn't really want to stop using the power to harass other countries in the region, it's really very tough to agree. And 3 or 4 years ago, when the Premier Li Keqiang, when he came to ASEAN meetings, they said that the code of conduct negotiation would be finished within 3 years, which is 2012. 2022. But then actually the negotiation still going nowhere until now, because now they only agree to accelerate the discussions on a single text of the code of conduct. So I think it's very hard for us to see very soon the finish of this code of conduct, and obviously the peaceful environment in the South China Sea.
It's interesting you say that, because my question to you was going to be how serious you think China is this time round and actually wanting a code of conduct, given that they have agreed only in July last month to accelerate this process and to have a code of conduct within 3 years. So what you're saying is that is not going to happen and China is not serious. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's very interesting to see that China only interested in negotiating this COC or code of conduct with other Southeast Asian states after 2016. So after the Permanent Court of Arbitration granted a win to Philippines when they sued China to the international court. So after that, I think Beijing believed that it's probably better for them to actually kind of delay the process of legal process of other country by appearing to agree on a code of conduct, but actually at the same time they use the power to militarize the South China Sea, building artificial islands and threatening other countries in their own exclusive economic zone. So many people in Southeast Asia really believe that the decision of Beijing to negotiate actually an act of delay in order to prevent other countries from actually joining together in an effort to counter China's effort on the South China Sea. But at the same time, they try to create fight on the ground by, really building military power on the South China Sea. So when they realize that China actually controls the South China Sea by force, there's no way for them to turn back. There's no way for them to prevent that from happening.
Right. So what you're saying is basically that Southeast Asian nations have been presented a fait accompli, given that in the past decades, for instance, China has fully militarized at least 3 artificial islands, is apparently building an airstrip on another one near Vietnam right now, and continues to have skirmishes with Philippine ships. You're saying that ASEAN is essentially out of options, correct?
Yeah, sure. So I think ASEAN countries, especially countries like Vietnam and the Philippines, they actually know the motivation after China's decision to join the negotiation. But ASEAN as a whole doesn't really have a lot of options. So first, they think it's better to at least have dialogue with China, although the dialogue might go to nowhere. It's probably better than having no dialogue at all. And secondly, if you have this kind of negotiation, at least within ASEAN, they can create a kind of unified grouping of countries with the same interests, like the Philippines and Vietnam, joining forces together in order to negotiate a better term with China. And third, it is important for countries like Vietnam and the Philippines to show that they actually try to solve the situation by peaceful will. It's not they trying to militarize the way like China has been doing, but they try to actually use the rules by order, use international legality to solve the problem with China. So it's kind of like a good signal for smaller countries like Vietnam and the Philippines to actually show their goodwill, even though China doesn't really have this kind of goodwill towards them.
We'll have to leave it there for the time being, but thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Nguyen Khac Tsiang from the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure.